If you don't have one from last week, don't worry about it. I'll just give you the scriptures and just some talking points that are on the handout. And if you want one, I can get you one later. But it's going to be, we're going to be starting in Genesis chapter 9. The hot topic we started last week was human sexuality. We went back to Genesis 1 and talked about how God created Adam and Eve, and he made both male and female in the image of God, and how they were naked. And it points out about 3 times God brings up this idea of nakedness. They were naked and they weren't ashamed. And as soon as they ate the forbidden fruit, what happened? Yes, and they saw that they were naked. And we're human beings, so we know as soon as somebody says something about being naked, we're talking about sexuality. We just know that. It's like the comedian Arsenio Hall. He put it, I thought, a good way. He said, naked means you don't have any clothes on. But naked, that means you don't have any clothes on and you're up to something. So they were naked. They weren't up to something at this point. They had been up to something with the fruit, but they realized from eating the fruit that they were naked, and God clothed their nakedness with animal skins. Pretty obviously, animals had to die for those skins to be provided. I used to say, well, it was possible that God just made some animal skins without taking them off of the animals, but then I thought, that's a pretty stupid position to take. Why wouldn't he make mohair jackets or something like that? So it seems pretty evident that animals died so that they could be clothed, and that's you can see that as the first example of death in the scriptures as a result of sin. So we've got this idea of nakedness and nakedness needing to be clothed. And then Genesis 4, Cain had a wife after he killed Abel, and had a son named Enoch, and Enoch's line produced the first guy to take 2 wives. His name was, anybody remember? Lamech. Lamech was the first guy in Scripture mentioned as having taken 2 wives instead of 1. And he's also the guy who seemed to push this idea of retribution, violent retribution. He said, if Cain is avenged 7-fold, then I will be avenged 77-fold. So we get to Genesis 6, 2 chapters later, and God says, I'm going to destroy the earth. Why is he going to destroy the earth? Twice he points out why he's going to destroy the earth, and it's violence. So all this comes through this idea of sin. All right, Genesis 9, that's what I introduced to you. Let's take a look at some points that are made here in Genesis chapter 9 and verse 7. What do we read? Somebody read it.
And as for you, be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it.
Had he ever said anything like that before? That's what he told Adam and Eve in the beginning. Be fruitful and multiply. I've given you sex as a gift. Use that sexuality on one hand to be fruitful and multiply, and that's what they did. Now the population of the earth has been wiped out except for Noah and his family, and he says the same thing. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. Multiply yourselves in the earth. From chapter 9 and verse 7, we go to verse 18. Sons of Noah came out of the ark. They were Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Ham was the father of Canaan. These 3 were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. Noah began farming and planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk, uncovered himself inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his 2 brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, and what did they do? They put it on their shoulders, walked backwards. What were they doing? Covering their dad. And what were they not doing? They weren't looking. They knew there was something about the nakedness of their father that they were not supposed to see. Cain had seen it, and instead of treating that situation with honor and trying to protect his father's honor and his dignity, what's he do? He tells his brothers, I don't want to make any assumptions about what his attitude was when he told his brothers, but I know what Noah's attitude was towards him when he found out what had been done. And what did Noah do as a result? Who did he curse? He cursed the downline. He cursed Canaan, Ham's son. So this is Noah's grandson he's cursing. I wish there were a few more verses to tell us what's going on here, but this is all we're told. The land of Canaan eventually took this young man's name. And it came to be known not only as the land of Canaan, but Canaanites became known for their sensuality. Maybe there's a connection. When you start doing the digging and the excavating and find the artifacts in the area of Canaan that relate back to how they worshiped in a very sensual way. Their religion involved sex and sexuality. So this might have been part of the problem. At least it looks like the grass is moving in that direction. If you look at Genesis 15 first. These are some passages I noted in the handout to sort of bear this idea out. In Genesis 15, God is making his covenant with Abram, and he tells Abram prophetically in verses 13 and following, God said to Abram, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. Where would that be? That's Egypt. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. And then in the fourth generation, they will return here." Where were they? They were in what would be the land of Canaan, and that's where they would return. Why the fourth generation, according to verse 16? Yes. And the Amorites were Canaanites. They were some of the downline. And God says, I'm not bringing your people, your descendants that haven't even been born yet. Your son hasn't even been born. But you're going to have a son. I'm promising you a son. Isaac would be the son of the promise, and from Isaac would come Jacob, and from Jacob would become the sons of Jacob, or the sons of Israel, who would become the nation that in 400 years' time would come back. Why 400 years? Because the iniquity of the Amorites, or in this case they're standing in for the Canaanites, is not yet complete. 400 years of sensuality, 400 years of idolatry, 400 years of living in a way that is against God. 400 years of that, and God says, when that's complete, I'm bringing you out of Egypt, taking you into Canaan to give you their land. And what does God tell him to do with the Canaanites when he does that? Wipe them out. Wipe them off the face of the earth. That was essentially the message. Leviticus chapter 18. Some more keys, some more clues, some more insights. This is part of the law that God is giving Israel as they are beginning to inhabit the land of Canaan. Leviticus 18, verses 24 through 30. Who wants to read that? You're probably tired of hearing my voice. Somebody read 24 through 30 of Leviticus 18. Got a volunteer? All right, Alan.
Do not defile yourselves with any of these things, for by all these the nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you. For the land is defiled, therefore I visit the punishment of its iniquity upon it, and the land vomits out its inhabitants. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall not commit any of these abominations, either any of your own nation or any stranger who dwells among you. For all these abominations the men of the land have done, who were before you, and thus the land is defiled. Lest the land vomit you out also when you defile it, as it vomited out the nations that were before you. For whoever commits any of these abominations, the persons who commit them shall be cut off from among their people. Therefore you shall keep my ordinance, so that you do not commit any of these abominable customs, which were committed before you, and that you do not defile yourselves by them. I am the Lord your God.
How many times did you see the word abomination or the idea of defilement? Just over and over and over in this brief text. And if you look at, just kind of skim down through chapter 18, what he's talking about is sexual sin. All the ways that people can have sex that they're not supposed to be having sex and abusing the gift that God's given. And what does God say about this? It's an abomination, and what else? What's that? It's unclean, it should make you sick, and what else? If you're part of this, you don't have any place. What else? All right, I'll tell you. It's right there, over and over. The imagery of the land vomiting them out. It's not that God's bringing the Israelites in to wipe them out. God is saying the land has spewed them out. I don't know exactly what that means, but the imagery that God is giving us is unmistakable, that this is something that the creation God gave them was not intended to be used in this way. Even the place where they are inhabiting, he says, is vomiting them out. When Paul writes the letter to the church at Rome, what does he say of the creation? He said it's groaning in travail. Why is the creation groaning in travail? It's this stuff right here. Now, lest we think, yeah, it's those low-life Canaanite scum. That's who. Well, it's us too. That's a point that he makes in Romans. We're all sinful. The difference, I would hope, between Christians and Canaanites is Christians say, yes, we're sinful. We're sorry for it. We hate that. We're trying to get away from that. And we say that's wrong, and we try not to practice that. The Canaanites go, well, yeah, bring it on. Give it to us. Nothing wrong with that. That's religion to us. So when you look at it in the world, it's the same thing. And people say, today, they will say, why is homosexuality worse than any other sin? And the answer is, well, in general, it's not. It is in some cases, because not every sin is called a perversion or an abomination. But it is sin, and so is gossiping sin. So is lying sin. So is mistreating your neighbor sin. However, there's not a social, political movement afoot to make lying legal. That's the difference between the practices that are going on now, to make it legal and to make it legitimate. People are trying to get laws passed that say it's going to be against the law for us to say that the practice of homosexuality is a sin. That's what it's coming to. Yes?
You know, talking about it, it goes that the land itself was vomiting them out. You know, if we go back to the very first of Genesis, and he started talking about the creation. Every time something was created, he said, and it was good.
It's good.
Now, so we're right down to man. And so every creation was good. The only creation that veered from what it was created for was man. So the only thing that's out of sync with God is not nature. Nature's not out of sync with God. Everything is doing what it was created for except for man. And so nature is saying, we want to get rid of you because you are the one thing that is out of harmony. You know, the one thing that's out of harmony of all creation is man.
Right.
Everything else is doing what it's supposed to do.
And with regard to all other kinds of sin, God never says the land is spewing you out because you're a thief or you tell stories or you bear false witness against your brother. He says these perversions of sexuality are why the land is spewing you out. What I'm trying to give us a picture of is how sex began in the mind of God for us, what his plan was, that we would be male and female in his image, and that we would enjoy that sexual relationship as he intended it to be enjoyed, instead of it being turned into some kind of sick perversion as is being done here. And if you read down through chapter 18, you're going to see they're having sex with their sisters and their mothers and their aunts and their neighbor's dog and everybody else, it seems like. And that's why the land, God said, is vomiting them out. And I'm holding you back for 400 years until this abomination is complete, and then I'm sending you in to wipe them out. Yes.
I went to a sex education class, and I asked the therapist, I said, is sex, is it for procreation or recreation? And he said it's for recreation. And back in this time where ancient Babylonians and everybody, they did not have anything to do for enjoyment. They didn't have any football games to go to, anything other than the three W's. They had wine, women, and war. That is the three things that held up every empire back then. And he says it is for recreation, because if it was for procreation, I mean, what's it good for each child?
There's no doubt that it's for recreation, but recreation for whom? For a husband and wife. That's the idea. It's not just the idea, that's the truth of what God says. I'm creating you, male and female. I'm creating you in my image. And in the image of God, we not only have a spiritual image, but a physical image that is sexual in its nature. And we've got an attraction for a reason, because that is part of our makeup as people who are created in the image of God. And when we get to 1 Corinthians 7, Paul makes this point, that it's not just for procreation, but for every man to avoid fornication. What's he supposed to do according to 1 Corinthians 7? Have his own wife. What's every woman supposed to do to avoid fornication? Have her own husband. And whose body belongs to whom? He makes it very clear. The wife's body belongs to the husband's body belongs to the wife, and he's not saying anything about having babies. So there's a relationship there that God is putting his stamp of approval on, that he's already put a stamp of approval on 1,000 years before this, just through the Song of Solomon. Have you read the Song of Solomon? What's the Song of Solomon all about? It's about a guy looking at his bride and going, "Whoa, baby, she is beautiful." Now, the things he says might not translate that much to us. If you go up to a girl, guys, and say, "Your nose is like the Tower of Babel," she might smack you in the face. Or, "Your teeth look like a flock of goats coming down the hillside." Or, it won't translate today. But 3,000 years ago, that was romantic stuff. And God inspired Solomon to write that down, and the whole book is about his admiration for his bride and how beautiful she is physically. And he didn't say anything about, "Oh, she's really smart, she's got a good personality." Nope, it was all about, "Oh, va-va-voom." Now tell me that that's not a gift of God, that we can look at one another and see that kind of beauty, and the first thing we think of is, well, yeah, but we're going to twist it into something awful. Yeah, we might, because we can, but we don't have to. You can see something beautiful for what it is, for what God created it to be, and you can see it as the gift that he gave to us that we can enjoy without any inhibitions whatsoever. That's what marriage is for, so that in marriage we're satisfied completely and we don't feel the need to go outside of marriage for that satisfaction. We can find it all right there. That's God's plan. That's his grace. We talk about the grace of God when it comes to salvation through Christ, but the grace of God began to take place in the universe as soon as he said, "Let there be light." The fact that there is light is God's grace. The fact that there are animals that are marvelous to look at and interesting, it's God's grace. We've got water and marvelous things to eat and drink. It's all part of his grace. And so is sexuality, part of his grace. But like so many other things, humanity has twisted it around. Alan. Sure. Good points. Let's see, have we covered all this? Nope, Leviticus 20. One more text likened to the one we just looked at. 10 to 23. Leviticus 20, 10 to 23. If there is a man who commits adultery with another man's wife, one who commits adultery with his friend's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. If there's a man who lies with his father's wife, he has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood guiltiness is upon them. What did he do? He uncovered his father's. Did he touch his father? Who did he touch? His father's wife. And God says, in the process of touching your father's wife, you have uncovered your father's nakedness. Why did Noah curse Canaan? Because his nakedness was uncovered. Why is God bringing these things back to our attention over and over and over? He's saying, this is not the way it's supposed to be. You know how it should be. If there's a man who lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have committed incest. Their blood guiltiness is upon them. If there's a man who lies with a male, as those who lie with a woman, both of them have committed a detestable act. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood guiltiness is upon them. If there's a man who marries a woman and her mother, it is immorality. Both he and they shall be burned with fire. Can you imagine being married to a girl and her mom? I don't know. Okay, let's just go on. I'm just asking. So that there will be no immorality in your midst. If there's a man who lies with an animal, he shall surely be put to death. You shall also kill the animal. If there's a woman who approaches any animal to mate with it, you shall kill the woman and the animal. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood guiltiness is upon them. If there's a man who takes his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, so that he sees her nakedness and she sees his nakedness, it's a disgrace, and they shall be cut off in the sight of the sons of their people. He's uncovered his sister's nakedness, he bears his guilt. If there's a man who lies with a menstruous woman and uncovers her nakedness, he's laid bare her flow, and she's exposed the flow of her blood. Thus both of them shall be cut off from among their people. You shall also not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister or your father's sister, for such a one has made naked his blood relative. They will bear their guilt. If there's a man who lies with his uncle's wife, he has uncovered his uncle's nakedness. They will bear their sin. They will die childless. If there's a man who takes his brother's wife, it is abhorrent. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness. They will be childless. Why is he saying all this stuff? You're therefore to keep all my statutes and all my ordinances and do them, so that the land to which I am bringing you to live will not spew you out. Moreover, you shall not follow the customs of the nation which I will drive out before you, for they did all these things, and therefore I have abhorred them. Who were these people? The Canaanites. What did Noah say of Canaan? He's cursed. Is there a connection? It seems to me that there is a connection. How do you break the connection? You hold sexuality to be sacred. It is sacred. In the eyes of God, it should be sacred in our eyes. Last point on last week's handout. Having children by concubines becomes an accepted practice in ancient times, and while God seems to tolerate it, the practice is never officially approved by God. And then, of course, Genesis 16, 1 to 16, you see where Abram and Sarah have not yet had a child, and what does Sarah do? It's her idea. Here, take my handmaid and have a child by her. I tried to make the point last week. I don't know how well I did it. God made men to be the leaders in the home. In this particular case, Abraham was not the leader in the home. This was Hagar's idea. If Abraham had been thinking right, and I know we're looking at all this from after the fact, but if Abraham had been thinking right, what would he have said? He said, that's not God's plan. You're my wife. God said you and I are going to have a child. We're sticking with that. But he didn't say that, and so Ishmael was born, and there's been trouble ever since. Dayton.
In 1 John 2, 15 through 17, John seemed to summarize even what was in Matthew 4 in regard to the temptation of Christ, and some will parallel it with Eve's temptation in Genesis. But he said, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world, and then he classified it.
Right.
The lust lust of the eye, and the vain glory of life. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him, and that the love of the world will fade away, but he that doeth the will of God abideth forever. That's the passage. But it's interesting that he narrows it down to three factors, two of which we're definitely talking about right now. And he tied that in with love. Remember John 14:15, Jesus said, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. This strong force that God put in us of the ability to love, unless it is directed toward the Father, it will invariably go toward the flesh, the eyes, the vain glory of life. And not only will that fade away, but it is, it's the loss of the key to human relationships, that is love properly arranged. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eye. And God seems to know that our makeup is going to have a lot to do in those areas. We're going to love something.
Right.
And He's trying to guide us in the right direction.
And I didn't put it in the outline, but relating to that, when sex becomes the dominant thing in our thinking, what happens to people as people in our eyes? Especially those of the opposite sex. Yes. They become objects rather than people. And rather than seeing them as someone created in the image of God, bearing the image of God, we see them as there's potential for my sexual gratification, and that's as far as it goes. We don't take it any farther. So it's a whole process, and as Dayton was pointing out, if we love God, everything will align. But if we love something other than God, it'll all get out of alignment. You ever driven your car when it was out of alignment? What does it do? It doesn't go straight, and you are constantly struggling to pull it back to where it is straight. It will also wear out your car in the process. And it'll wear it out in a one-sided fashion. All right, that's the end of of last week's worksheet, and we're probably at about the end of class now, aren't we? Well, we've only got 2 pages to do on this one, so we can probably whip through it before the first bell. Yeah, that's a joke. All right. And we are starting where it says, This Week, Human Sexuality, Part 2. Just what is the question regarding human sexuality? We're looking for an accurate recognition of human sexuality. That's all we're asking for, an accurate recognition of human sexuality. First check mark there, God does not judge on the basis of conditions, but on behavior. In other words, this discussion is not about being male or female, but should be how we accept these distinctions and how we interact with one another with regards to them. And then we are living in a day of sexual confusion. You may not agree with that. Women's rights, and I'm going back a little ways, a few decades. The ERA. Who remembers the ERA? Some of you are just so young. Okay. What was that? Equal Rights Amendment. Now, is there anything wrong with women and men having equal rights as far as equal work, equal pay? Is that what this movement was about? No. It was about political dominance. That's all it was about. It was about power. It wasn't about equality. It was about competition. How many remember Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs? And believe me, I'm not standing up here to defend Bobby Riggs for his behavior and all that mess, but that sort of was a little microcosm. Billie Jean King was a professional tennis player. She took several awards, and she was like 29, and Bobby Riggs was an older, he was 55, I think, and he said, I can beat any woman. I can beat Billie Jean King in a tennis match, and they had a tennis match, and he lost. She beat him. And it was like, okay, so we've proven now that women are superior to men. Boy, that's okay. Yeah, well, it's because they want to. there are aspects of both sexes, because they're created in the image of God, that we should celebrate. It's not about, well, if I say something good about that sex, then that's going to put me down a little. No. You're created in the image of God to be who and what you are, and so is the other person of the opposite sex. And this whole thing of, well, we're going to have a tennis match and see who's superior, no.
Women are created, or the wives are created, for the husband to be helpmate.
Because men need help.
And because men usually can't do two things at once.
But when you do it the way God designed it, even though there aren't any perfect men and there aren't any perfect women, but when you take a man who wants to do it God's way and you put him with a woman who wants to do it God's way, things work out pretty well. Things work out pretty well. And as long as they keep God foremost and they respect each other, we talk a lot about love in a marriage. Well, love, yeah, but respect. And there are some times that respect is much more important than love. If you respect one another, it's going to make a difference in the way you treat one another. But sometimes you'll treat people you love like dirt. I don't know if you've noticed that or not. That's free. I'll just give that to you. It's not in the scriptures, but I throw it right out there. LGBT, what does that mean? Yeah. A Q? Okay. All right. They don't want to leave anybody out. It's like the Areopagites in Athens. So we want to build a monument to the unknown God because there might be some, we don't want to hurt their feelings. What? Oh, yeah. Well, and boy, this is being recorded. I'm going to get in trouble for this. But you shouldn't call anybody nigger unless what? Unless you're black. If you're black, you can call other blacks nigger. And that's okay. Is it? No. Well, that's another discussion. But, yeah. I've spoken from a true cracker right there, boy. Can we call each other crackers? Don't you let anybody else call us a cracker, though. I'm going to go get lunch down to Cracker Barrel. Well, you talk about a racist restaurant, I'm telling you what. There was a comedian, he was a black guy. He was so funny. He said, all this racial stuff and this profiling, it's all true. And I'm sure I've told you this before. And he said, and by the way, did you notice how racist all these games are? Like pool. You get one white ball and it knocks all the colored balls around. He said, my favorite game is bowling. You take a big old black ball and you knock down a bunch of white pins. I love that game. He was hilarious. He said, what's the deal about olives? I mean, green olives, they're put in a glass jar. And you just look, oh, there's green olives. But black olives, what do they do with black olives? Put them suckers in a can. It's just, see, a guy like that can make some good come out of it because he can make us see it from the ridiculous standpoint that it is. No. But they've added a Q. I was also reading today, my own state, West Virginia University, which, by the way, was in the news because their marksmen in the Olympics won medals. The first medal won was a little lady from West Virginia, won a marksmanship for shooting air rifles. Of course, you never heard that on the news, I don't think, because it has to do with firearms, which is not actually a firearm, it's an air rifle, but still it's a gun. But we also had a lady that medaled 6 times in skeet shooting. Did you ever see her on the news? Okay, just asking. But it gets back to this political correct stuff. Unless it's bad. What did I see about West Virginia in the news? It was oh yeah, that at the West Virginia University, they have now made it mandatory that you refer to people with the sexual-oriented pronoun that they desire. In other words, if I say I'm a woman, you got to call me she or her. Really? Oh no. I like what I read. Somebody wrote, 70 years ago, 18-year-olds were storming the beaches of Normandy, taking the Germans out of the whole place. And today, they're trying to find safe places at universities where nobody will hurt their feelings with words. And there's a lot of truth to that. A couple of notes about biology. Carrie and I were talking about this at the end of class last week. The sex of a human being is determined at conception, but sexual features do not begin to differentiate until about 7 to 9 weeks into the pregnancy. External organs begin to develop at this point, but are not generally obvious until about the 17th week. That's when they do the ultrasound. If you want to know what sex your baby is, about 17 weeks, they'll do the ultrasound to say, hey, we saw that it's a boy or it's a girl. As with the formation of any physical or physiological trait, things can develop abnormally, and this is certainly true of the sexual organs, chromosome activity, hormone levels, and other aspects of the development of that are typically related to distinctive sexual characteristics. Hermaphroditus, anybody ever heard of him? He was a mythological son of Hermes and Aphrodite, having both female breasts and male organs. This name is used to classify folks who are born with an abnormal endowment of physical sexual traits. In other words, some folks have physical traits that are both male and female. They might look like a boy but have girls' equipment, or vice versa. And it's just the way things turn out sometimes. We've seen children with all kinds of different birth defects. And we know, well, that when that happened, something didn't go the way it was supposed to. And so they didn't have an arm, or they had a shorter arm, or something didn't form right. And the same kind of thing happens with sex organs and other sexual traits. Statistical estimates vary for the number of babies classified as hermaphrodites from between 1 in 1,500 to 1 in 3,000. The Bible, as far as I know, doesn't directly address this condition. It doesn't say anything about people who have both sex organs. A note about sexuality at the bottom of the page. As a person's genetic background, we call it race, is to be considered of God and therefore holy, so a person's sex is of God and also to be considered holy. As lineage is to be respected and celebrated, so is one's sex. In other words, if I'm white, I shouldn't denigrate the fact that I'm white. I should celebrate that. Somebody who is brown or yellow or red, whatever your physical lineage is, that comes from God's initial creation, and that's to be celebrated. The same thing goes with sex. If I'm a man, I should celebrate being a man. If you're a woman, you should celebrate being a woman, and we should celebrate each other's sexuality the same. That's the way it should be. Now, I brought all that up because the Bible on the back page, talking about the Bible addressing sexual behavior, but the first note is that God addresses behavior. He never addresses temptation as sin. We are all tempted in various ways, and most everyone is tempted in a sexual way to which she must refuse to respond. We cannot help but have our attractions, but we are in control of our response to those attractions. Now, the other part, the hermaphrodites, and I'll use that term. I don't use it in a derogatory fashion at all. It's a scientific term. I don't know what all the answers are for folks with that situation, but I know that behavior is what God always addresses. I know what faithfulness is in a sexual relationship, and I know what unfaithfulness is. I know what perversion is with regard to same-sex relationships under normal circumstances, but I don't have questions for the rest. I don't know that we should start these arrows, but if you will promise to bring these back next week, we'll go through that list, and you can be looking at those yourself. I didn't include every single passage in the New Testament, and I didn't include any in the Old, though there are several. Read through, just skim through the Song of Solomon and see what you think of the Song of Solomon. Read through some of the passages that are related to that in Proverbs. It's like when you read Proverbs, Solomon gives us a little taste here and there of what he's going to be going through in Song of Solomon. And it's fairly explicit, because sexuality wasn't anything to be embarrassed about. It's in the Bible. If you give your child the Bible and have them read Proverbs, they're going to come across this stuff, and they might come back and say, well, what does this read? Daddy, what's that mean right there? Well, I don't know. You better know it's in there, or your face is going to be red. So we've got all these passages, Lord willing, we'll look at next week when we come back. And if you've got any observations or questions or comments, we've got a little time left before the bell. Yes?
Just a thought that brought in for clarification. At the beginning, you've already mentioned God's intent was that the relationship between the sexes would beget children. And we know that unto this day is still the rule and the operating law. Now, in these biological, unique situations where one has some sex organs of one type and one another, if we left that rule guiding, if the gender was female that could get a child, had the organs,
The biology.
then should not that person respond to that part as a relationship with God's plan and be a woman? And if one could beget a child according to that arrangement, then let that person be a male regardless of what other strange or unique physical factors might come into it. In other words, would God's plan for procreation help answer that question if we would take that part of God's direction?
Good point. One other thing I'll say, we hear so often this term, in these terms, God intends for us to be happy. And I don't really read that so much in Scripture. What I constantly read in Scripture is God intends for us to be righteous. If we make it a point to be righteous in the eyes of God in all of our behaviors and all of our thoughts, if we make it a point to be righteous, happiness will take care of itself. If we search for happiness, and this is probably the only fault I have with the Founding Fathers, because they said, pursue happiness. Well, don't pursue happiness. Pursue righteousness. And if happiness is going to be yours, it'll follow righteousness, or it won't follow at all. Thank you. Lord willing.
Spiritual kingdom I mentioned last week, it still be true in Galatians 3 that we get the bond of free male or female.
Yes.
So one baptized into Christ, gender ceases to be a factor.
Right. Souls don't have a sex.